Why don't I get started? Again, my name is Kevin Kodama. I'm the Senior Service Hydrologist here at the Honolulu Forecast Office, National Weather Service. Thanks for joining us for another wet season outlook for 2021 and 2022. It's amazing how time goes by. Just feels like yesterday that we did this. The first one in the pandemic mode, and I was hoping that that would be the only one, but unfortunately, the way things worked out, yet another wet season briefing in remote mode. So I'll get started. One thing I wanted to do first is start off with a summary of the recently completed May through September dry season. We had an early start to the dry season. Once May rolled around, it didn't take long, but severe drought had already become in place on the Big Island along the Leeward Kohala slopes in the early part of May. And then when we got into June, drought conditions quickly worsened, and we got into severe drought, which is the D2 category on the U.S. Drought Monitor map in Maui County by the end of the month, end of June. And that drought in Maui quickly became extreme drought, or the D3 category on the Drought Monitor map by late July. And severe drought also developed along the lower leeward slopes of Oahu in late July as well. And then Kauai has actually had the best rainfall conditions during the dry season across the state. And so, they ended up drying up, but they didn't have drought conditions develop until much later in the dry season. And they actually finally went into severe drought status only in second half of September. And even then, it was only a pretty small area, really along the lower leeward slopes between Hanapepe and Waimea. And that was primarily due to pasture land degradation is affecting the agriculture sector. So, overlooking overall, and as is usually the case, the worst impacts again affected the agriculture sector, mainly ranching. We got a lot of impact reports from the ranchers in Maui County and the Big Island. And we even had some reports of cattle losses, and that was in Maui, in the Kaupo area, and also some crop losses. Crop losses were made worse because of access deer encroachments onto farmlands, because vegetation conditions were so bad elsewhere that access deer started going onto farmlands, and we received reports of severe crop losses because of the access deer. And in addition, for the island of Maui, Maui County's Department of Water Supply had declared upcountry Maui to be in a stage 1 water shortage, and that occurred, I believe, in July. On the Big Island, drought conditions contributed to the record-breaking Mana Road brush fire that happened in the latter part of summer, and that caused quite a bit of impacts. And in fact, the impacts from that are going to linger for quite some time, because there was so much damage to the soil that it's going to take a while for the grasses to regrow in the area. And then there's going to be already severe erosion issues going on in that area where there's the burn scar, and that's also creating an elevated risk of flash floods in the area because of the changes to the soil. Looking at the numbers from the dry season, and just based on the data we had from our key rainfall sites, we ended up with the 6th driest dry season in the last 30 years. Looking at some of the more significant numbers, Honolulu Airport had its lowest dry season rain total in 30 years. Lihue Airport and Kahului Airport both had their 5th lowest rainfall totals, and this is for the May through September timeframe. And then Molokai Airport had its 6th lowest total. So looking forward into the wet season, the NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, they just declared yesterday that La Nina has returned, and they're expecting it to persist into spring of 2022. And based on a consensus of our climate models, it looks like the intensity of the La Nina event will be at the moderate level, and as far as what the model consensus model model outputs are projecting. And so we're breaking it down month by month. The wet season looks like, it's going to start off slow. So October, November, we're looking at the continuation of below average rainfall conditions, and then transitioning in December. But by the time we get around to January, the model forecasts are looking at large scale, wetter than normal conditions across the Hawaiian Islands area, and that will last into April or through April. So we're looking at the second half of the wet season to be fairly wet. And this is actually similar to last year's, the last wet season, October 2021 through, October 2020 through April 2021, and also similar to the one that occurred in 2011 and 2012. So if we do end up with a moderate La Nina or even stronger, what we're looking at is the potential for heavy rainfall to mainly focus along the east-facing windward slopes, and that's due to expected higher than normal frequency of trade winds if we have a moderate to strong La Nina event. And this also means that leeward areas of the state may end up with below average totals, especially in Maui County and the Big Island. We do have a greater possibility of drought recovery for Kauai and Oahu due to both islands having a less intense drought going on, but also because these islands are smaller and rainfall can get into the leeward areas more easily. And also wet season weather systems have a greater chance of reaching both Kauai County and Oahu before they stall out or dissipate as they're moving eastward across the chain. So with that said, similar to 2012, well, we could see drought ease in Maui County and the Big Island, but still make it through the end of the wet season at the end of April of 2022, which would be really bad news as we head into the next dry season, the 2022 dry season. So, hopefully that won't happen, but, when we look at how drought has behaved in similar situations, we've had cases where we enter the the wet season in October with pretty significant drought. Drought may weaken, but then get out into the end of the wet season still in place. So, that's definitely a possibility if the La Nina event is moderate to strong. If it ends up being a weak event, then there's a higher likelihood that we may get more significant low pressure systems with more westerly winds, Kona winds, and that'll get the rainfall into the leeward areas. But right now it looks like looking at least a moderate event, and so we could see a repeat of what happened this past year. So that's all I have, and I'll take some questions now. The wet season media advisory, it should already be up on our webpage at weather.gov/HFO, and it'll be in the top news section. But if you have questions, John can, if you can type them into the question box and John can read them out, or you can raise your hand and he can unmute you. So I'll take whatever questions you may have. Thanks.
Okay, Kevin, we've had one question submitted through the chat box so far from Michael. This one from Michael Phillips. In past outlooks, you've described the potential for how volcanic emissions can impact rain production on the Big Island. Are there any thoughts on how Kilauea's current eruption is influencing weather, if at all, or would an ongoing eruption influence the overall wet season outlook for the Big Island?
That's a really good question, but well, there's a couple of factors. One is that the wet season months, October through April, are actually a rainfall minimum for the Kona slopes. Their wet season is actually in the dry season for every place else in the state. So their rainfall peaks out in June, July, and August. And so right now we're kind of heading into the drier part of the year. And if we don't get low pressure systems that bring in westerly winds in the low levels, so Kona winds, then they may not really see as much rainfall. Now, as far as the impact for the volcanic emissions, it's with the ongoing eruption. Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell. I don't know how long that will go. If the emissions are not too bad right now. I mean, you know, they're not as high as they were back in 2018, and you know, and so I think it may not have as much of an impact this time around. But of course, you know, if it does get worse, then it may serve to potentially suppress rainfall because of the particulates in the air competing for you know, water vapor, you know, moisture. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Certainly, this summer, when when the eruption was not really going on and there was not, you know, fog getting into the Kona slopes area, they had another wet summer. They're pretty soggy on that side of the island. So we'll see what happens going forward.
Okay, next we'll go to attend with his question raised. John, I've unmuted you. Go ahead with your question.
Hey, Kevin. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Good
Okay,
morning.
great. Good morning. I've got a couple of questions. The first one is, you said it's going to be sort of soggy. Well, it's been very soggy in Hilo lately, and I realize that Hilo's kind of known for that. But are we in a below average cycle right now as far as rainfall goes for this time of year? And secondly, for the Kona side, because I'm asking for both papers, it appears to me that at least in the last month or so, the Kona coffee belt, which is we all know has its wet season in the summer, appears to have a wetter than normal dry season going at this point. I know there's a question in there somewhere.
Yeah, it's they've had a pretty wet, sustained summer, and you know, going forward, you know, as far as the Hilo side, right now through the first before October, you know, Hilo's a bit above average, but over the dry season, they've been just around 79-80% of average for the whole dry season. You know, going forward, you know, this actually is what you've had. You know, of course, we're doing the wet season briefing, and I'm calling for, you know, a dry start to the wet season, but you know, Hilo just gets 10 to 11 inches in upslope areas, so you know, that's the way it works sometimes. But you know, it should be drying out, especially early part of next week. And you know, the long-term, I mean, the large-scale models, they're really showing a pretty significant dry signal for the October into November, and so you know, we'll see how that all plays out. Certainly for the leeward areas, you know, if we stay in persistent trade winds, and especially if the trade winds aren't going to be too strong, then leeward areas for the rest of the state aren't really going to see much. But I think Kona side, the rainfall is going to begin to taper off as we get in, you know, farther along and toward the end of the year, and it's not going to be quite as wet as they were earlier in the summer.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll go to Andrew. I've unmuted you. If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Great, thank you. Kevin, I have a super general question. So if the prediction is for a moderate La Nina, is that better or worse than a stronger or weaker La Nina if we're just talking about, you know, most residents statewide?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's your perspective. If you want wetter conditions, you know, broad scale across the entire state, then you would rather have a weaker La Nina, I think. You have a better chance of getting rainfall into, for instance, Honolulu, Waianae, Kihei, Maui, you know, those places. If you have a weaker La Nina event or even Enso Neutral conditions, we actually get pretty wet during Enso Neutral. But if you get a stronger La Nina event, moderate to strong, and you have higher frequency of trade winds, then you're still going to get heavy rain events, but it's going to tend to be more on the east-facing windward slopes. And so you can have significant heavy rain event going on and really not much going on in the leeward areas. In fact, you know, when you just point back to, you know, I talked about how 2011, 2012, maybe similar to this coming wet season, and also looking at this past year, those were both La Nina events. In fact, in 2011, 2012, that was the second year of La Nina, just like what we're going into now. But March 9th, March of 2012, if you recall back, that's when there was the state record hailstorm and the tornado in Kailua. And in fact, that same day we had significant flash flooding on Kauai, Molokai, and Maui as well. But those were all on the windward slopes, and the leeward areas really didn't get much. And so if the La Nina gets too strong, or moderate, if it's moderate to strong, we see more frequent trade winds, then we're not going to get as much rainfall in places like Waianae or Kikaha, areas like that, the leeward areas. So we'll just have to see how strong the La Nina does get. And in fact, you just look at this year. Everybody remembers March 9th or the March 7th through 13th, a sequence of events. That was we had some pretty big rain events, but again, with the exception of Kauai, the rest of the leeward areas of the rest of the state really didn't see too much, significant impacts on Oahu or on the windward side. Same thing for Maui. Maui did see some they had some of it get into leeward areas, but really not much. And so that's why Maui County got into drought conditions so fast, this dry season, because they did get some rain, but really they didn't. It was just late in the wet season, and really didn't. It was just one or two events, and so conditions were pretty bad. And you recall how late the wet season started for Maui County. Molokai was actually in exceptional drought, was D4 conditions in early January, and that was because partly because of the axis deer just cleaning out all of the forage, and so you had a lot of problems. Then they were starving to death, and really they didn't get into any rain events on Molokai. I think it was until February, and then they got another one in March, but then they dried out pretty quickly. So that's I guess it all depends on what you want. You want a lot of rain widespread, then you want a weaker event. But if you would rather have a drier winter season, and if you're on the leeward side, then better chance. If you're on the windward slopes, you're going to get. I think it's going to be pretty wet for you, regardless.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Mark. Go ahead and ask your question.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, Kevin. Good morning. Thank you very much for doing this. This is Mark Carpenter with Hawaii News Now. Yeah, a two-parter. First, last year's wet season, where did that rank historically? And two, thinking back to that heavy rain event that we saw in March, I think that's one of the things that comes up when we're talking about wet season. Should we project similar events then to happen this year, and definitely be on alert for something that, a lot of severe conditions happening like that in such a quick amount of time?
Well, going back to the rankings, that's a tougher one in terms of. I think it was actually, if I recall correctly, it was just outside of the top 10, like 11 or something like that, or might have been number 10. It certainly wasn't way up there. And as far as the intensity of events, yeah, we can't forecast that we're going to see another intense event just like that, but we're just going to be vulnerable at that time of year to get pretty intense events. You just have, I think the best idea is to be prepared to, for these similar types of events, significant flooding events, especially if you're on the windward slopes, if we get into a moderate or strong La Nina. But, really across the state, this is a time of year where, you really should be prepared for an uptick in rainfall. And, remember all your flood safety tips. Don't cross fast flowing water. Even if it's, just 2 feet deep across roads, don't go across, don't attempt to cross. If you're hiking out there, it really doesn't take much. Even just as little as 6 inches of fast flowing water can sweep you off your feet. So if you're hiking and you see elevated stream levels, it's best not to cross. You know, if you've already gone across on the trail and you're coming back and the water has gone up since you went across earlier, then it's best to wait it out, because, you know, Hawaii streams, they go up very quickly typically, but they also tend to recede fairly quickly. So it's much better, you know, to wait it out. You know, it might be wet, but at least you'll be safe. And so, you know, don't attempt to cross fast flowing water on foot. So, you know, if you know, we have a higher likelihood of thunderstorms this time of year. And so, you know, if you're outside and you hear thunder, see flashes of lightning, you know, get indoors. Definitely, if you're out in the water, you know, get out of the water, you know, those types of things, and just you know, be prepared for impacts, road closures, or, you know, detours or canceled events, that type of thing. Just, you know, be patient, and just expect delays due to weather during, you know, this time of year. So, but, you know, in terms of anticipating or forecasting, you know, the type of event that we had in March, you know, we can't, you know, it's forecast that level of intensity. Just, you know, we want people to be prepared for potential significant events that have a higher likelihood of occurring, you know, during the wet season.
Okay,
Awesome. Thank you very much.
We have 3 questions that have come in through chat. I'll read those. First one from Audrey McAvoy. Will risks for wildfires grow with a wet season like the one you're forecasting?
Certainly, if we get into a moderate to strong La Nina, and, you know, there's already pretty dry conditions existing in the leeward areas. And so if the leeward areas remain dry because of the strength of the La Nina, then, you know, the risk will not only remain, but potentially increase, you know, for the leeward sections. If the La Nina event weakens, or is a weak one, and we get some of these big rain events that bring rainfall to the leeward sections, then, you know, there's chance for regrowth, and you know, the risk will go down. So it's kind of, it really depends on the intensity of the event. You know, last year we did get some easing of drought conditions, so that was good. Yeah, you know, hopefully we can get some rain events into the existing drought areas, and then that'll tampen down the risk for wildfire. But right now, it's based on the outlook, you know, there's a risk for drought to persist into next dry season. And so, you know, if that happens, then we're going to see wildfire risk not only through the wet season, but just increase next summer. So, you know, hopefully it won't be that. Hopefully that won't be the situation.
Okay, the next question. We've talked about Governor Ige declaring Maui County a disaster area earlier this year. This might not, I'm not sure if this is one you'll be able to answer, or hopefully you can point us to some more information if not. How long does that declaration last? Is there an ending time? And what sort of resources are there for farmers and ranchers? What do they have now in light of possible worsening drought conditions on Maui?
Yeah, that, sorry, I can't answer that question. I guess that maybe Haima would be the agency to check in on regarding that. And as far as disaster assistance, yeah, again, it depends. I know the state has released some resources. You know, I'm not certain on exactly what those resources are. You know, if it's financial assistance or actually help with projects, things like that. I think this, again, the state would know more about that. But also the federal government, you know, USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, Farm Service Agency, because of their own drought declaration for farmers and ranchers, they do have some assistance programs available. And so farmers in Maui County can contact Farm Service Agency in Maui, and their point of contact is James Orbello. He's the the county coordinator for the Farm Service Agency. So, you know, they have assistance for forage, and I believe they have you know, low interest or low loans available. But again, yeah, contact the Farm Service Agency for specifics on their assistance programs. I know they've actually been working on that already because of the ongoing drought. So, you know, if it continues, then those programs will continue to roll on, I think.
Okay, next question from Michael Phillips. As the state moves into wet season, are all weather radars and rain gauges up and running fine? And are there any expected gaps in data collection due to maintenance or equipment issues on the horizon?
Certainly, we don't have any significant outages going on right now. You know, at any time we can have a gauge go down for, you know, various reasons. I mean, we have a couple that are out now that will get back in service. For instance, there's one Kahakuloa on Maui, Windward West Maui, and our tech's gonna head out there to get that back in service. But in terms of significant outages, I think, you know, all our systems are pretty much up right now. But again, you know, we could see some temporary outages go up and down, and as they occur, then we'll have some of our technicians go out there and get them back in service as soon as they can.
A question from Kamaka Pili. Can you give us a quick basic overview of what is La Nina?
Sure, that's a good question. La Nina is an anomalous cooling of the sea surface temperatures near the equator, and that is the reverse of El Nino. El Nino is an anomalous warming of the sea surface temperatures near the equator. But you know, it's defined by the ocean conditions, but there's an atmospheric component as well. And you know, sometimes the ocean shows La Nina, but the atmosphere says no, I didn't get the memo, and it doesn't quite respond. But in this case, the ocean is showing La Nina, and the atmosphere is also showing La Nina, and so they're in sync right now. And so in between La Nina and El Nino events is what we call Enso Neutral. So again, the La Nina is unusual or anomalous cooling, El Nino anomalous warming, Enso Neutral is in between, so closer to average. And typically these events go in a cycle, so they come back every 2 to 7 years. This is our second consecutive year with La Nina, or heading into the second consecutive year, and that's not that unusual actually. It's a fairly regular occurrence, especially considering the strength of the first year of La Nina made it actually quite likely that we would have seen a second year La Nina if you look back in history. So, you know, these events tend to peak out during either the late fall, early winter timeframe, and then slowly ease as we get into the spring. And by the summertime, the La Nina event will tend to run its course and we'll go back to Enso Neutral. As far as, you know, looking into next year, it's really too soon to tell. It could stay at Enso Neutral, or it could shift over to El Nino, but it's way too early to tell. And even as you get into the spring months, you need to kind of get past May, what they call the spring predictability barrier, to get a little more confident on what's coming up for the second half of the year. So stay tuned.
Okay, and we have one last question in the submitted through chat from Audrey McAvoy. To what degree is global warming affecting the wet season outlook?
Right now, I don't factor it in. In terms of, you know, I don't do like a bias adjustment or anything like that. I'm just taking the consensus of the model outputs and guidance from the Climate Prediction Center and try to apply how those large scale conditions will be reflected by the local scale conditions, you know, because the large scale models don't resolve our mountainous and complex terrain at all, or very well at all. And so we have to apply our local knowledge of how the local conditions, you know, change the large scale conditions. So, you know, the whole windward leeward thing, you know, the climate models can't see that. So we have to kind of we have to make our local adjustments. Certainly, if there's a global warming signal in the data that go into the large scale models, that may be reflected. But in terms, I don't personally say, oh, because of global warming, I need to adjust my forecast a certain way. It doesn't. I don't factor that in at all.
Okay, so we actually have one more hand raised. Andrew, go ahead.
Thanks again, Kevin. You did mention that last year's wet season was around, top 10, the high end of top 10. So was last year a stronger La Nina, or did it end up being a stronger La Nina or also moderate, or?
It was a moderate, it was in the moderate range, moderate to strong range. I think it peaked out with minus 1.3 Celsius in the sea surface temperature anomaly. So what that means is moderate is between -1 to -1.5, and below that or warmer than that is between -0.5 and -1 is considered to be weak, and then colder than -1.5 is considered to be strong. So I believe it peaked out at -1.3, so it was right in that moderate range. And the projections so far for this coming La Nina is that it'll be right around the same or maybe a little weaker, but the confidence, there was quite a bit of spread in the model projections, so the confidence wasn't extremely high. So we'll have to see.
Thank you.
Any other questions out there? If not, thanks everybody for tuning in. Be safe this coming wet season. And again, if you didn't get the wet season outlook, or at least from the media advisory, it's on our webpage, or should be already there. I didn't verify that. I had it supposed to be up there by now, but it should be in the top news section of our webpage, weather.gov/HFO. But if not, you can feel free to send me an email. That's probably the best, or you can call me at the phone number that was listed in the announcement, and be glad to take any additional questions you may have. But otherwise, I think that'll do it. We'll wrap it up here, and thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us.